I'm Greg Carr, your host here on the Black Star Network. Every Friday, we spend an hour exploring ideas and subjects of particular importance to African people and to others working to build a better society. As we join each other this week, we have been joined by Attorney Lisa Davis. This is it's going to be a very rich interview. Lisa Davis is one of the foremost entertainment attorneys in the country. She's chair of the entertainment group of Frankfurt, Kernet, Klein, and Sells, representing celebrities in the film, television, publishing, music, theater, and sports industries. She's been ranked as a New York area super lawyer since 2007 and featured on the cover of Super Lawyers magazine in a discussion of her career and advocacy for racial justice. She has a number of awards. She's been given awards from everyone from Who's Who Legal to the New York Business's 2023 Notable Women in Law, Hollywood Reporter Power Lawyers, and several times, 2021, 22, 23, 24, 25, and been listed as well as one of New York's top 20 entertainment lawyers. There's a lot more we could talk about related to her career. I do want to mention that she clerked for one of our legends, the great Constance Baker Motley. That's no small thing. She practices law in New York and in New Jersey. She's there with her family. And today we are here to discuss a remarkable new book. This book, Our Minds Were Always Free, a history of Black brilliance, of how Black brilliance was exploited and the fight to retake control. We're joined by attorney Lisa E. Davis. Welcome to the Black Table, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carr, and I'm glad to be here.
Oh yes, and please, Greg. It's an honor to have you in this space. We were talking before we entered the show about the nature of this book, this discussion of intellectual work among African people and how it has been exploited, and how it has set the template for exploiting creative people of all walks of life. But before we get started with that, your experience, which is so deep and so varied as it relates to this subject, wondering what came across your mind to say this book needs to be written, because there's not a book like it that I'm aware of, and I'm a book person, but I'm not aware of a book anywhere near or like Our Minds Were Always Free. What led you to actually do the research and give this book to us?
Well, what made me think about exploring this topic in depth, I've had a 3-decade plus career representing creative people of all stripes in the entertainment industry. And the foundation of that, of course, is the law, intellectual property law, contract law, financing law. And I had a front row seat to seeing how embedded biases often impact the kinds of deals that people get, whether they get to monetize what they've created. And I wanted to go back to the roots, go back to the origin of intellectual property history, the history of creativity in this country, to sort of follow that line along and see where it led.
Thank you. 10 chapters, and each of them just a remarkable deep dive into the nature of intellectual property. As Eric Lott wrote some years ago in a book on blackface minstrelsy, of love and theft. Love our culture, love our creativity, but also stealing. And with all due respect, while you say you start in the United States, you actually overflow the boundaries of this polity by anchoring this creativity in those who were taken from Africa. Do you mind saying a word about a particular person who many of us became aware of during COVID, Onesimus, and his intellectual work, which didn't start in the United States, but came from Africa, in fact, but was very quickly appropriated by those who did not compensate him, in fact, didn't even free him. Could you talk a little bit about Onesimus and how he represents that pre-trafficking, pre-slavery genius of Black people?
Sure. I mean, and I think the foundation for looking, or the framework for looking at Onesimus's story, is recognizing that the Europeans didn't simply just go to Africa and snatch up a bunch of Black people. They went to specific places where we had specific skill sets that they were going to then use in the New World, in the colonies, after they displaced the Native Americans. So whether it is iron smelting and steel forging and cultivation of various crops, we had those skills when they brought us here. That's why they brought us here. And Onesimus was someone who brought the smallpox inoculation innovation to the United States. He was enslaved by Cotton Mather, a fire and brimstone preacher in Boston, and smallpox epidemics, often emanating from the disgusting conditions that enslaved people were brought here in, were ravaging the colonies. And so Cotton Mather asked Onesimus whether he'd ever had smallpox, and he explained that he had been inoculated. And Cotton Mather asked him, what did that mean? And he said, well, where I came from, which was from what is now Ghana, the doctors there would take a small droplet of smallpox and cut a small incision in someone's arm and purposely infect them. And what resulted was a mild case of smallpox and then immunity from the disease. So Onesimus was responsible for starting inoculations against smallpox in what became the United States.
Yes, ma'am. I'm glad that you explained it that way. I think about, of course, someone you write about in the book, Thomas Edison, who is credited with having said that necessity is the mother of invention. But you very quickly begin to lay down the marker for Black creativity by talking about those who were creatives, but creatives out of necessity. You talk about Lewis Latimer. You talk about Eli Whitney, and young people think, oh, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. You clear that up very nicely. So, I mean, in terms of people creating out of necessity, could you talk a little bit about these examples of Black folk who are creating, but then not getting credit for what they did, which was really almost like applied science as they were moving through the world?
That's exactly right. And again, the image that people have of slavery is of an undifferentiated mass of people performing physical labor. And no one thinks about the life of the mind of those people. But again, as I mentioned, since we came with skills, we were not an undifferentiated mass. And as we were working, we were looking to figure out ways to make that work less backbreaking for us. So with the cotton gin, there was an enslaved man named Sam who had come up with that gin based on something that his father had shown him. And then Eli Whitney simply mechanized it and patented it. But we have the records showing that the actual cotton gin mechanism was originally invented by an enslaved man. Then there was a double-bladed plow, which was invented by someone only known as Ned, whose trafficker tried to get a patent in his own name and was frustrated because the thing about patent law, if you are not the inventor, you cannot get a patent. And to me, what was most shocking in my research was the doggedness with which these traffickers tried to change the law and own the product of the enslaved people's minds. And they lobbied Congress over and over again prior to the Civil War to change patent law so that they could own not only physical labor without compensation, but intellectual labor. And interestingly enough, in the Confederate Constitution, that provision is in there, that they would be allowed to own patents on the inventions of the people that they quote unquote owned.
Yes. It's interesting. I don't recall, and it's been 40 years, just about 35 years. I don't recall in my constitutional law class at Ohio State covering that statutory authority to own one's creative work that you cover in this book. Do you mind talking about some of the roots, the constitutional roots of the authority to own one's creative work? And as you just said, a case that comes the year after the Dred Scott case that I also don't recall we talked about in constitutional law that did exactly what you just said.
So certainly, I mean, to me, one of the things that was Really interesting. I went back to the beginning and went back to the Constitution. And if you think about the United States' emergence as a global superpower, I would argue that it is for two reasons. One, it is our approach to intellectual property, and two, it is the ability and the insistence on exploiting Black people as property. And both of those concepts are in the Constitution before you even get to the Bill of Rights, because you have the provision that says that Congress shall make laws protecting science and the useful arts and reserving to their owners a limited monopoly. So, and it was a different approach to the ownership of intellectual property than Britain had. So it was more favorable to an individual than what the European countries had. And then America perfected chattel slavery, so they had that concept as well in the Constitution before the Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm. And then, as you say, they cleaned it up very nicely in the decade leading up to the Civil War by saying, after Roger Taney says, look, Negroes don't have any rights that we're bound to respect. Then they said, oh yeah, and by the way, if you create something, it doesn't belong to you.
Right, because
like,
since you're not a citizen, you don't have the right to own a patent. And it's interesting also when you look at the evolution of patent law, because Thomas Jennings, the first Black person to have a patent, took advantage of that interregnum before the country had solidified how little rights Black people were going to have. He was in New York, and he was able to get a patent for a method of dry cleaning called dry scouring, the precursor, and it's a foundation for dry cleaning methods today. But that was because he, in the early 19th century, before things were so solidified, basically was able to own a patent. And Martha Jones makes the point that intellectual property ownership is an indicia of citizenship, which is why that we had that opinion some 20 years later saying, no, you can't own a patent if you are an enslaved person.
Yes, man. I'm so glad that you raised our sister Martha Jones at Johns Hopkins, of course, one of the foremost experts on birthright citizenship, something we never thought we would have to fight about again. But
Right.
The way that you fold that into creativity, I think, is brilliant. We're going to take a break here, a pause, and when we come back, we will continue with Lisa Davis, author of Our Minds Were Always Free, a history of how Black brilliance was exploited and the fight to retake control. Back in a moment.
I'm Brittany Noble, Midwest-born, HBCU educated with experience in newsrooms across the country. I've teamed up with Roland Martin to bring to you The Breakdown. This isn't just news. It's our stories, our voice, our community. Join me for The Breakdown, Monday through Friday at midday, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to the Black Table. We are with author and attorney Lisa Davis, author of Our Minds Were Always Free. Lisa, when we left, you had walked us right up to the Civil War, and in the aftermath of the Civil War, of course, we see Black creativity continuing unabated. And then the technology continues to develop, continues to shift. And as you enter the next several chapters in the book, chapter 2, God and the Devil, Gospel Music versus the Blues, could you give us some commentary on the great sister, Rosetta Tharpe, and the contrast between how she experienced her creativity and the theft of her creativity with Thomas Dorsey? And then maybe we'll talk some about these independent Black record labels that come into existence. But give us the landscape in terms of the life and career of Sister Rosetta Tharpe and what we can learn about creativity and theft from her life.
Certainly. I mean, Sister Rosetta Tharpe is only belatedly now being recognized as really the creator of rock and roll. She was a gospel artist, a singer, and guitarist, and she was known for literally, people would say she made her guitar talk. And she recorded the first rock and roll record in the 1940s. Strange things are happening every day. And yet, again, was not recognized. Yet the people that we do credit as pioneers of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, they all credit her, they name check her. Jerry Lee Lewis sang her song in his audition for Sun Records. And then she had a fallow period in the late 50s, and then the British rockers, well, actually it was British jazz musicians, brought her over for a tour in the UK. And so the British rockers had exposure to her style of playing, which they all mimicked. And the reason that she could not monetize the methods that she pioneered is because they were performance. And performance is ephemeral, and copyright is only available as protection for creativity if it can be, quote, fixed in a tangible medium. You play the guitar in performance, and then when you finish, it's gone. And the recording, if somebody records you, you don't own that, the person who records it does. So there was an ability to mimic and copy what she did, not even name her, and not pay her. So yes, she got paid for performing, but that was it. There was nothing to create a passive income stream. Thomas Dorsey, by contrast, really created modern gospel, Black gospel music. He was a blues artist who toggled back and forth between the secular and the sacred. For the beginning of his career, was an accompanist for Ma Rainey, and then had a mental health crisis, which precipitated a spiritual awakening, and he decided to dedicate his musicianship and his life to the church. He was a mentor for Mahalia Jackson, and what he did, first of all, he wrote and arranged spirituals, and so he had copyright interest in the compositions. I believe he had about 400 songs that he had copyright ownership in. And in addition, he set up the institution that routinized Black gospel choir performance style. And he was the president of that organization until he died. So he had something like a 50-year run really structuring gospel music, structuring intellectual property. So he understood the importance of copyrights, and he understood the importance of an institution to regulate, in effect, how Black church choirs would perform. So that's a real difference.
That's very interesting because, thinking about our sister Viola Davis portraying Gertrude Ma Rainey, Columbus, Georgia's Gertrude Ma Rainey in the August Wilson play, and then film adaptation, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And of course, as you mentioned her, out of the foundation of Ma Rainey springs a figure that emerged prior to Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the great Bessie Smith. And by contrasting, as you did, the distinction between Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Thomas Dorsey, it allows us now to have you maybe say a few words on how that previous generation sees, if not the same thing, something very similar between someone like a Bessie Smith, a protege, of course, of Ma Rainey, as you write, and Harry Burleigh, who seems to also have. Could you talk to us about this distinction, and maybe even some of the gender implications and class implications of that?
Certainly. I mean, Bessie Smith, that is such to me, a tragic story, because in 2026, almost 100 years after she died, everybody knows who Bessie Smith is. And yet, despite that, she made tons of money while she was alive, but that ability to earn money died with her. She rescued Columbia Records from bankruptcy, and yet had a recording contract that didn't pay her any royalties. So the only money she made from the songs she recorded were the session fees. And then by contrast, Harry Burleigh, who had the advantages of being male, being middle to upper middle class as a Black person, being light-skinned in a society that was very colorist, was able to harness intellectual property. He wrote what were called art songs. He arranged Negro spirituals. He was a founding member of ASCAP, which is the Public Performance Society that tracks the performance of copyrighted works in hotels, malls, restaurants, bars, stadiums, and creates another income stream for copyright owners. So when he died, he left an estate that was worth about $4 million in 1949, such that his family members were fighting over it. So that's a real distinction. And of course, Bessie Smith had an impoverished childhood in the Deep South, in an incredibly racist place. So she had none of the advantages that Harry Burleigh did.
I feel like there's something cultural there in terms of the distinction made in the law and in intellectual property in particular between the performance and the recording. This obsession in Western culture with the thing itself as opposed to the process. It reminds me of something Gary Giddens once said about Sonny Rollins. He said, Sonny Rollins almost views sometimes recordings as advertisements for you to come see him at the club. In other words, to see him, so I'm using the records but the money is in the recordings. And of course, you think about Sterling Brown's great poem, Ma Rainey, when he talks about how Ma Rainey would come to town and folks would come from all around, from Poplar Bluff to see Ma Stretta and stuff. But these artists are true artists and creators. Meanwhile, these folks who don't have the talent are anchoring the performance in the ownership of the material record. But it seems like we finally kind of, I won't say we caught on, because clearly you give us the example there of Burleigh and Dorsey, but then you start talking about the institutionalization of this. Could you say a word or two about VJ Records and maybe Motown and how it's okay, now we're going to figure out how to do something maybe different as this thing kind of shifts?
Certainly. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that in that period that you had VJ Records and then the emergence of Motown, the 50s and the 60s, certainly with VJ, Black music was really on independent labels. The quote unquote major labels were doing pop music, the Pat Boones, the Perry Comos, and nascent R&B and rock and roll was really independent labels. And so VJ Records, Vivian Carter, who started out as a DJ, started a record label. First, she had a record store with her partner and then husband, Jimmy Bracken. And then she said, well, to complete the chain of commerce, if I have a record label, I can sign artists, I can play their music on my radio show, and then I can sell the records. And so I can get the entire chain. And Corey started out, was acutely aware of value and used, in fact, he used the copyright interest on the songs he wrote for Jackie Wilson to secure a loan from his family to start Motown Records. So, and I think the divergent fate of those two labels in part is due to Berry Gordy's more sophisticated understanding of the value of copyright, because he set up a publishing company, Joe Bet, which was the contraction of the first syllables of his three children's names, and controlled the publishing for all of that incredible Motown music that he recorded. Whereas Vivian Carter and VJ, even though they brilliantly were able to sign the Four Seasons and the Beatles before Capitol Records, because they were spending everything, and there seems to be no indication that they understood how to leverage the publishing copyrights that they controlled. They ended up going bankrupt, which is really sad, but they also were exploiting artists in a very similar way to the way that the predominantly white-owned labels were.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, listen, Lisa, I would love to go page by page through this, because I'm sure as everybody is listening, the depth of research here and the command, I mean, it is really just, it's very illuminating. We're going to take a break, and we come back here, we're going to talk about another area of Black creativity. We're going to talk about film. and talk about some of how this manifested, this question of Black creativity and how Black folk were fighting to control their creative work made manifest in film. And maybe we'll go back in time a little bit to the good brother Oscar Micheaux, so you can walk us through how this idea of ownership has never been absent from the minds of Black folk. So we'll be back here at the Black Table, back in a moment.
Hey y'all, welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network and hosted by myself, Bria Baker, and my good sis, Jamira Burley. We are just two millennial women tackling everything at the intersection of politics, gender, and pop culture.
And we don't just settle for commentary. This is about solution-driven dialogue to get us to the world as it could be and not just as it is.
Watch us on the Black Star Network, so tune in to The Other Side of Change.
We're back at the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. We are with attorney Lisa Davis, whose new book, Our Minds Were Always Free, is giving us a real tutorial in not only Black creativity, but how that creativity has made so much profit for others. Lisa, when we left, we said we were going to talk about film now. Let's go back to that early 20th century. I don't know that there are many undergraduates in the United States that aren't familiar with Birth of a Nation, the 1915 film by D.W. Griffin, and but who probably are not familiar, if they are familiar at all, maybe not as familiar, with a film called Within Our Gates, and of course, one of the great creative geniuses of early cinema, the great Oscar Micheaux. Could you give us your insights as to contrasting not only those two films and those two creators and directors, but what they mean in this long journey of Black creativity and profit?
Sure. I mean, to me, what was so interesting as in comparing the two of them, of course, Within Our Gates was an answer film to Birth of a Nation, because Black people knew the minute we saw the film, we knew it was racist, we knew it was anti-Black propaganda, and it was skilled filmmaking, just as Leni Riefenstahl is skilled filmmaking. That doesn't make it any less pernicious. And we understood that. We fought to try to stop the film. We were able, the NAACP protested and was able to get him to get D.W. Griffith to cut out a scene that showed a white woman recoiling at a Black child that because allegedly they had body odor. So they took that out. And he also took out a final solution coda that showed us all being shipped back to Africa. But it's been held up for decades as a brilliant piece of filmmaking with very little acknowledgement of how incredibly racist and anti-Black it is. And what was so brilliant about Oscar Micheaux's film is that it was nuanced. It was a response, but he didn't show every Black person wasn't, an angel. There's a reprehensible Uncle Tom who basically frames an innocent Black person for the murder of a white man. And ironically, when the lynch mob can't find the person they're looking for, they turn on the Uncle Tom and lynch him. And there's also a wonderful white philanthropist who helps the main character in her fundraising efforts for a Black boarding school. So it's much more nuanced, and yet Oscar Micheaux's film is the one that was censored because of the depiction of lynching, and also is the film that was not protected under copyright. So when you go to the Criterion Collection, what you find is a restored copy that was found in Spain so that it has Spanish language subtitles to it, because it was not protected under American law, and almost disappeared.
You know, gosh, so many thoughts come to mind as you're narrating this. You know, it seems as if Oscar Micheaux wasn't gonna miss no money when he was writing his novels, The Homesteader, where he's out here selling them, he's showing his film. And you write earlier in the book about a fascinating family in Davis Bend, Mississippi. The time, what is it? Isaiah Montgomery, the Montgomerys, right? And the son, if memory serves me correctly, because one of the books you quote is about Davis Bend and about Mound Bayou. I know at one time, I think the son left, Isaiah left Mississippi and went to the Dakotas and was trying to make it, but then came back. You know, but this whole theme of self-determination and business, it doesn't seem to be a new thing. Black people, I mean, Micheaux is pioneering. If he could have brought off what he was bringing off, we might not be talking about what we're talking. Could you talk about some of those early attempts to create these independent spaces where Black folk could profit from their own labor?
I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, Benjamin Montgomery, to me, is a fascinating story, because this was an enslaved man in Mississippi, owned by a slaveholder who was inspired by the industrial cooperatives in Scotland, and decided that he would allow the enslaved people on his plantation to retain some profit from basically a side hustle. Benjamin Montgomery was incredibly well educated, because he had been born and enslaved originally in Virginia, and originally had been taught to read and taught mathematics along with the child of his former slaveholder. So he came to Mississippi with these incredible skills, ended up owning a general store and having steamboat captains and white people on the plantation as his customers, and made enough money to ultimately buy his wife's freedom, buy his children's freedom, hire a teacher to educate his children, and then after the Civil War, end up owning not only the plantation where he was enslaved, but the neighboring plantation, which was owned by the brother of his slaveholder, a man named Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. So that, to me, is just an incredible story.
It really is. It really is. And even while the heart of your book, of course, is about entertainment, it's not exclusively that, because by tying into Montgomery's, of course, you show the other forms of creative intelligence. And folks, we all know the name Emmett Till, but we know that surgeon, Theodore Roosevelt Howard, was able to have that house in Mound Bayou, Mississippi, where Emmett Till's mom spent the night during the trial, because it was an all-Black town that had come from the mind of Ben Montgomery's son. I mean,
that's right.
It's also it's so very, very important. And Micheaux conveys some of that sense of Black determination, as you say, self-determination, in a layered sense. And I think about, of course, his film Body and Soul, where young Paul Robeson plays a crazy preacher. Right. Micheaux had this, you know. So a couple of generations later, you see another generation of Black film actors who also aspire to ownership. You spent some time talking about the great Sidney Poitier and what they tried to bring off in the 1970s. And so could you talk a little bit about how these actors say it's not enough of me being in front of the camera or even behind the camera as a director, we need to own some of this intellectual property we're creating?
That's absolutely right. I mean, to me, what was so inspirational about Sidney Poitier, he was very clear about the kind of roles that he got over and over and over again in the early 60s. And he said they were one-dimensional. He recognized they were middle class. You didn't really see much of an inner life in a lot of those characters. And he was a brilliant actor, but he got some advice early on from white producer who said, make sure you learn what goes on behind the camera. Don't limit yourself to acting, or as you say, even directing, but understand producing. So he did that, and then he ended up founding a motion picture studio along with Steve McQueen, Barbara Streisand, and Dustin Hoffman. They co-owned a studio, and it was a public company. And it didn't end up being ultimately successful. because it just didn't. They didn't make enough films. Their output wasn't nearly as much as the major studios, but we wouldn't have Uptown Saturday Night or Let's Do It Again or Buck and the Preacher without that studio. So again, the nuanced depictions of Black people come from situations where we can own not only what we write, but we can own, the means of production, the studio that decides what films get made.
It really is striking, isn't it? And I didn't realize until very recently, when you see that label at the beginning of some films that says UA, United Artists, that was their attempt to create some self-determined space for themselves. And we love those films, of course. And but you also note that they're called blaxploitation, which is a very complicated rendering, because you also evoke someone who went out there with a shoestring, spit some bubble gum and backing, and made a film called Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. How does Melvin Van Peebles fit in this arc that you're laying out for us?
Well, I think the way that Melvin Van Peebles fits into this arc is, of course, Sweet Sweetback became the template for pale imitations. And just as when you have a painting and you make prints, the 20th print is not nearly as faithful to the original as the first one, the blaxploitation films took the wrong elements from his film, because he really was making, it was a required viewing for members of the Black Panther Party, because his film was about taking on the man. And I think that he had some of the sex in it, because he said, well, I got to make it entertaining, so it's like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. If you're trying to put across a fable about Black liberation and about what it would look like if we simply refuse to take what is being dished out, if you leaven that with some sexuality, then you make an interesting, complicated film. And Melvin Van Peebles was somebody that just refused to take no for an answer over and over and over again. He had 5 or 6 different careers over the course of his life. He was in the Air Force, and of course, he was not able to do what most white Air Force veterans do and get a job with a commercial airline. So he went to Mexico and was painting portraits. Then he came to San Francisco and he was a cable car operator. Then he wrote a book about that, and the cable car company fired him. And then he started making short films. And then he decided to take the GI Bill and study astronomy in Europe. And then when his marriage broke up, he moved to Paris, and I don't know whether he knew French before he moved there, but then he started writing short stories and novels in French. I mean, that's a genius and a polymath.
Yes.
And
yes.
He, and again, we are endlessly inventive. He took the book that he wrote, made a film of it in France using French government subsidies, entered it into a US film festival as an entry from France, and through that got interest from American film studios.
It's amazing.
It is.
We're going to take a pause. It really is. We're going to take a pause here, and when we come back, we're going to bring this conversation right up into the living now. And for all the young people out here who got caught up in the Kendrick versus Drake moment, well, tell you what, Lisa Davis got something for you too. So we're going to bring it right up into the AI era with Our Minds Were Always Free. Lisa Davis back here at the Black Table in a moment.
A decade of love, joy, and power. Black Voters Matter is 10 years old, and we are just getting started. This is love with a purpose. This is Black joy in motion. This is unstoppable power. Across campuses, neighborhoods, and back roads, let's go. We show up not just to vote, but to be seen, to be heard, to belong. We ride together, we organize together. We remind each other that our voices matter. because they always have. Black Voters Matter is about more than ballots. It's about housing and healthcare, clean water and living wages, education, reproductive freedom, and dignity. It's about turning pain into action, turning belief into movement, turning community into power. We don't wait to be invited. We bring the energy. We bring the love. We bring the people. Because when Black communities come together, we don't just survive, we thrive. This is how change happens. This is how history moves. We organize, we build, we win.
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. Remember to support all of the shows across the platform. This is independent Black media, Black-owned media, Black media for the people. And we are very honored to be here today with Lisa Davis, author of Our Minds Were Always Free. Lisa, before we turn our attention to the contemporary moment and what's going on with these bots, I love the title of chapter 10, Not Like Us When the Bots Take Over. I must say, I was so thrilled to read as you describe some of the independent filmmakers who are closer to now. Our dear friends who we've had here at the Black Table, who are here in Washington, D.C., Haile and Shrikiana Grima. You talk about the LA Rebellion and those independent filmmakers. I laugh because Haile doesn't take money and has shunned Hollywood like the plague. The only thing that gets him out there sometimes is a young sister who is an incredible filmmaker, of course, of her own, who really has taken to him Ava DuVernay. He said, okay, I'll come for Ava, but I stay away from Hollywood. You have been in every dimension of this work. Could you say something a little bit, say something about the Tyler Perrys, the Oprah Winfreys, this next iteration of folks who are trying to own, even as they have engaged Hollywood, and in Tyler Perry's case, built something completely outside the Hollywood matrix?
I mean, I think that, and I start out talking about Spike in that chapter.
Yes. Thank you.
What links all three of them is that to the extent that you can own what you create for as long as you can in the process, you can control the image. I mean, the visual medium is so important. And we know from the early Hollywood films with the Stepin Fetchits and Hattie McDaniels that the images that were blasted around the world of us was subservient, comical, fearful, really not main actors in our own lives. And so when you have Spike and later Oprah and Tyler Perry saying, no, we are going to decide what image we project. And I'm not a film critic, so I'm not going to say anything about, anybody's, Tyler Perry's body of work, but he determined what stories he wanted to tell, what characters he wanted to create, and he owned that. And Spike, in making She's Gotta Have It, and then Get on the Bus, and all the films in between where he was writing the script and going to a studio once it was done and saying, I'm the writer, I'm the director, I'm the producer, I'm going to control what's on that screen. And that was responsible for widening the aperture in terms of images of us. And I would say Oprah, even though she would not call herself someone who was remaking the image of Black people, just by her existence and owning that show, she did that. But then also using the example of Toni Morrison, she turned Toni Morrison into not only a Nobel laureate, but a best-selling author at a level that she hadn't previously enjoyed by profiling her. And Oprah's book club changed publishing. And now she's, with Tayari Jones and Kin, she is doing it again. And that's a brilliant, brilliant book. But she's giving, without saying, I'm giving Black women writers a platform. She gave a lot of Black women writers a platform to make it required reading. So in each of them in their own way said, we're going to force the mainstream to reckon with the images of Black people that we know are out there because we live it.
Absolutely. And thank you. Even though you do some rich cultural dives into the text, into the work that's being created, you say I'm not a culture critic, not a film critic, so I won't comment on that. But one thing's for absolute sure, you do detail how whatever is being created, there is a firm determination to own what's being created. I was in Anniston, Alabama, back in March, on the way to Montgomery, but stopped actually on the way to Birmingham, and stopped because I wanted to see the Freedom Riders, the Greyhound bus station where the Freedom Riders were, and had never been there before. And this was shortly after the news broke that Cat Williams had acquired a place that he was part of an old military base. He's going to convert into a studio, and he signed a memorandum of understanding with Miles College, the HBCU in Birmingham, to have students trained there. And of course, say what you want about Tyler Perry, what he said is, I'm using that model. But I wanted to say that to walk across the bridge to the contemporary moment, because he said one of the things these young people are going to have to learn is how to create film using the new technology. That means we don't need these huge sound stages. We don't need all of this physical infrastructure to do this work. You write about the rise of the bots take over, not like us. Could you talk about the latest wave of threat potentially to Black creativity in terms of profiting from it?
Certainly. So people talk about AI in every, you can't have a conversation without it coming up, and that it's going to change everything, and it's going to change the way we work. It's going to eliminate people's jobs. And there's been a real push for AI to be employed in art, in music. And, to me, what is dangerous about that is, as of right now, and it probably will remain so for some time, you cannot copyright something that is created by AI. People have brought multiple lawsuits, and the courts have been consistent so far in saying that if you just prompt something, that you can't own the copyright in what is ultimately created, because human creativity is required for copyright ownership. So that's the first thing, just being able to protect and therefore monetize what's been created. Humanity is essential. But the second thing is, if you look back through history, which is what I try to do in this book, one of the main sources of wealth for Black people is our creativity. We are creative in a way that no one else in this country as a group is. Every musical innovation that is considered American springs from Black people. So if we walk away from that, then we're walking away from one of the ways that we derive the ability to survive and thrive. In addition, in a society, if you don't have culture, you don't have a society. A society is not just about money. It's about what touches your soul. That's what art is. That's what Black people create. So one of the things that we've seen are these AI artists. There's FN Mecca that I talk about in the introduction, and then there was I forgive me for not remembering, an artist most recently that made the Billboard R&B charts, and it was an AI artist. Well, what does that mean for flesh and blood people who want to sing and write music and perform? Because if it's an AI artist, the labels don't have to pay them any royalties. So, it's a machine creation.
That's that is so. And it's funny because I'm showing my age here. I did not know what FN Mecca was until I read the introduction of your book, and it brings us full circle. I'm wondering if, because the young people were talking about this earlier this semester, is it Timbaland out of Virginia, apparently, who had an audition for people to send him beats, and then he combined the beats and created an AI artist. This is a Black dude, and I'm saying, so you've had to engage in extensive, complicated negotiations. You've represented artists. You are an authority in the field, one of the leading ones in the country. What does the future hold for young creatives, or not just young creatives, but for creatives really trying to not just be completely exploited by this latest iteration of technology?
You know, if I had a crystal ball, maybe I would be able to figure it out. I don't know. And I am worried. I am worried because the thing is, in that last chapter, I detail how little recording artists make from their recordings, compared to prior to the streaming and digitization explosion. When we had physical recordings, CDs that people bought, people made money on every CD. Now they're making a fraction of what they made. And of course, inflation has not gone down, it's gone up. So this is what I mean about if you don't have culture, you won't have a society, because this is not a country that supports artists the way some European countries do. And now we have an administration that has gotten rid of the small ways, the National Endowment for the Arts, that the arts have been supported by the government. So if you don't have that and you have a business model that doesn't pay people enough to live on, who is going to decide to become a musical artist? You can love it, but if you can't feed yourself, you're not going to do it.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And of course, in a 200 plus page book, we not only couldn't get to everything, we want to make sure everybody reads, but one of the names that you write about in the context of Billie Holiday and Dizzy Gillespie and others in the criminalization of Black creativity in the 1940s and 50s is Thelonious Monk. And I remember Monk saying, when he said, are y'all worried that people are going to copy y'all and steal your stuff? And Monk is like, yeah, by the time they copy whatever we're doing now, we're going to be on to something else. So it seems like that Black creativity is going to continue to echo. Lisa Davis, you've given us a gift with this book, Our Minds Were Always Free. Now, folks, of course, as you begin to go out and meet the people and give book talks around the country, is there a way for people to track where you're going to be and when? Are the book tours being planned? What's on the agenda to get out there and have people be in conversation with you?
Absolutely. So they should go to simonandschuster.com and please pre-order the book, because that's important. And then also at Lisa E. Davis Author on Instagram, and I will have all of my appearances listed there. So Simon & Schuster, I love my publisher, and they will have information on how you can pre-order the book, any appearances coming up, and at Lisa E. Davis Author on Instagram.
Absolutely. You're on the gram, so you got this thing mastered. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you in person, as I said before we went on, so I can get my copy of the book signed. Poetic Justice, Chef's Kiss, that you would have it drop on Malcolm X's birthday. So the 19th of May, we're going to, and of course, shout out to the ancestors, Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz, his wife and partner. Our Minds Were Always Free, a history of how Black brilliance was exploited and the fight to take control. Lisa Davis, thank you so much for joining us here at the Black Table.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Talk to you soon, and we'll be back in a moment.
I'm Brittany Noble, Midwest-born, HBCU educated with experience in newsrooms across the country. I've teamed up with Roland Martin to bring to you The Breakdown. This isn't just news. It's our stories, our voice, our community. Join me for The Breakdown, Monday through Friday at midday, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. I'm Greg Carr, the regular host, and we've just had this incredible conversation with Lisa Davis, author of Our Minds Were Always Free. This whole book that she's written, brilliant book, is about Black creativity and how others have exploited it. African people literally set the template and the model for human creativity. We're the first people on the planet. From building the pyramids and everything that came with that creativity, through the creation of the materials that built the modern world, through the various forms of culture, that have always bent the world to the ways that we see the world. Then, during the period of trafficking and after, we laid a foundation for, as Paul Robeson, the great artist, once said, the principal wealth, not only of the United States, but of the quote unquote Western world. Now, as Lisa Davis has shown us very brilliantly, we're coming for what they owe us. And our creativity is not just a gift to the world for everyone. It's got to be a gift to the world for us as well. Join us next week on The Black Table, and keep that dial completely locked all the time, wherever you consume your media, to the Black Star Network, a great example of Black creativity. All right, we'll see you next week.